I asked you this question before.
That's why I said yes like that.
But to tell the other people here, to tell a little story, I'm a 75-year-old retired psychiatrist, never touched marijuana at all in my life. All the guys that I worked with for the last 12 years at the boat building place used it all the time, but I never was interested. But I have prostate cancer and it's reoccurring, and I've got some aches and pains, and I'm very uncomfortable, and I just happened to check on the internet about marijuana and the research that's being done on how effective it is for curing cancer. And I've gone more and more into it, and the more you look into it, there's scientific research being done in Spain and Israel and in England about, and anecdotal things about people who are being cured of cancer, being helped their muscular, multiple sclerosis, for Crohn's disease, for all kinds of things that marijuana is really helpful for. And yet, and I want to use it. I want to grow a couple of plants, or actually if there was medical dispensary here for marijuana, I couldn't afford it. It would cost me to get the dosage I need from hemp oil or marijuana extract. It would cost me $1,500 a month.
This article would go, you get a picture.
And the current law in New York State says there's no provision for my growing my own marijuana, and it's set up so it's not going to work. It's a dead end. So what I really think that, and I spent the whole afternoon watching a congressional hearing talking with the White House representative for drug policy. And these guys are living in totally two different worlds. The congressmen are saying, you know, we have how many people have died from a marijuana overdose? Zero, nada. How many from alcohol? How many people have been damaged by tobacco? The thing is that the drug policy people are talking about the research that where marijuana, yes, it does damage or inhibit kids' intellectual growth if they take it when they're kids or teenagers. It seems to me, I mean, and the congressman pointed out, if you know the drug dealers on the corner are not checking out to see how old the kids are. However, if marijuana was legalized and it could be regulated, in Colorado, every single marijuana plant is labeled and it's traced. They have the electrical things where they can trace the marijuana. We regulate tobacco. We regulate alcohol. There's no reason why we can't regulate marijuana. And then people like me who are suffering from cancer could use it and get it. I think that we really need to make huge changes in our marijuana policy. And if you came out supporting legalizing marijuana, there'd be people coming out of the woodwork to support you.
Well, let me tell you what I do when I make a film. I go out and do something akin to what I've been doing here, which is listening to lots of people. In fact, this week I'm meeting with the Clinton County DA. I'm aware that there's a disconnect now with marijuana being classified as a Schedule I drug and the fact that there's legalization in 2 states for recreational use. I'm aware, my sister is a physician, I'm aware that there are medical uses of marijuana, and I support the medical use of marijuana. But I also want to know, and I'm aware that heavy criminal penalties for marijuana use may have some very high costs for our society. This is an evolving issue. It's an issue that I'm learning about little by little, and it's on the agenda for me to learn more about. And it's on the agenda when I speak to other people from different sectors of society, like law enforcement. I want to know how that strikes them. I want to know how the tax authorities think about it. That's part of my process. So I'm still learning on that issue. But I'm aware that it's an issue that is very topical and that people are talking a lot about and that people feel great passion for, and particularly people who are suffering from illnesses that are treatable with that drug. I'm aware that it's a much more charged issue than for the rest of us.
One other side issue, if you allowed hemp you would open up a whole new industry. There's paper, all kinds of products that could be made from hemp that could be grown easily. They grow it in Ontario, why couldn't they grow it here in the Adirondack?
I think it merits study, and there's even been discussion of cellulosic ethanol from hemp. Yeah. Matt.
I'll try to avoid talking about the 800 things we should talk about, and just talk about one of them in our backyard. General Electric just basically fired 200 workers in Fort Edward. It's a devastating blow to a very small community that's already been destroyed by their coming here in the first place. They polluted our water. They've been one of the largest corporate welfare recipients in the country. Recently, they were made a too big to fail by Congress, which means they can borrow money from the Federal Reserve at 0% and then lend it back to us as a bank, which they're doing. So we're paying the interest on our own loans to General Electric. They make $1.2 billion a month in profit, and they're one of our largest war profiteers. They are basically driving the military-industrial complex along with a couple other key players. They're going to move to a right-to-work state. They're going to Tampa, and they're going to pay $8 or $10 an hour to workers who are non-union when they just got rid of all these union jobs in our backyard that fuel small businesses like mine and all of the other infrastructure you've seen around Glens Falls that you so admire. What would you do as a congressperson to put an end to that?
Well, as a congressperson from this district, my job would be to keep jobs in the district and to try to add new jobs to the district. My job would be to fight for high-paying, fair wages. My job as a congressman would be to raise the minimum wage.
What would you raise it to, if you don't mind my asking?
I agree that with the president's plan to raise the minimum wage incrementally, and but look, doing so puts more dollars in people's hands. It raises demand for businesses like yours.
I don't disagree, but one thing I would ask you about that I've thought a lot about is there is a truth to it. If you're going to get the Republicans and other independent voters to agree that we need to raise the minimum wage, raising it a couple dollars to still an incredibly unsustainable amount still keeps, and what you're really doing is you're saying, I'm going to spend $4 less per hour on that worker because he doesn't get Medicaid anymore or food stamps. But in reality, we only have to give him $1.50 an hour to get that. It's a very cynical way of doing it to me, and I wonder, in your mind, what is a livable wage? I mean, if somebody works 40 hours a week, what do they need to be making? Because we all know the federal statute on that is insane.
We've had stagnant wages for a long time, as you know. We need to begin somewhere. 70% of the economy is driven by consumer purchases. We need to empower consumers. And yes, I think we do need to get people off of expensive public programs. I think that just like those farmers in Iowa who are on the corn subsidies, people want to work and get a living wage and get a fair price for their wares or their work. It's a start, and I think it's an important start, and I think it's an essential start, and it's something we need to address. Yeah.
I just want to, there's one short question based on what you just said. When you say get people off of programs, you don't mean kick people off.
No,
You mean get them.
I don't. I mean, make sure that we have the kind of economy that is going to require less people to be on federal assistance.
Okay, then
It's
that's-
not a kickoff.
Okay.
That is let's create the kind of jobs that create the kind of incomes that make people rise above the threshold where we as a society, as a compassionate society, of course we need to take care of those individuals. Of course we need to extend unemployment benefits. It's all a sort of cost-benefit analysis. It's all a kind of, what costs us more in the end. And I think we need to think about the full cost accounting, which is something that as Americans we don't tend to do very well. Matt just raised a very important question about, what happens when we incentivize certain industries. We've been subsidizing big oil companies since 1916, and their quarterly earnings reports may even dwarf the General Electric that you're talking about. It's really important to think about what the long-term consequences are of those choices. Excuse me.
No, that's all right. I thought you were finished. But you can never finish it. You talked about indirect consequences and policy. mean, just when you talk about the local economy here, you talk about small farms, farm policy. I mean, clearly hurts the small farm. Even extrapolate out, you can probably directly relate farm policy to the obesity problem and all the health-related problems with most of the young people and the people in our country today. What would you do in office to take on probably one of the largest lobbies, the corn lobby, and the farm lobby, as it currently exists?
I think we need a diverse food system. I think we need a food system that can sustain itself on a local and a national level. I think that diversified farming operations have all sorts of beneficial consequences for the environment. I think one of the most impressive and almost easy pieces of legislation that we can do in the realm of farm policy is to promote farm to school. When we promote farm to school, we support local farmers, we provide fresh, safe, good, nutritious, locally sourced meals for our children, and we keep the dollars in our community. That's a win-win-win. But I talk a lot about infrastructure. I think a lot about the physical and electronic and financial pieces that have to be in place to promote those kinds of policies. And the fact is, in a lot of schools, we've taken out kitchens. We've taken out the kitchens because it's cheaper to heat up frozen chicken fingers from 1,500 miles away in a microwave. You have less staff and you have less infrastructure. But the question is, what are the costs? We know that feeding children well, and some children get as much as 40% of their nutritional needs from school. We know that that can have extremely beneficial outcomes, not just in health, but in education. We also know that some of those beneficial outcomes, if they're not addressed, if those nutrition needs are not addressed in the pre-K period or in the pre-pre-K period, the latest studies are now saying from 0 to 3 is when the brain development most depends on that kind of good nutrition. That costs us. You know, what do we lose by investing in those programs, and what do we gain long term? Another question?
Well, what's your opinion on gun control? Do you think that Congress should pass a law banning AK-47 or M16 assault rifles?
You know what? I'm a gun owner, and I grew up in a culture of gun ownership. I have lots of friends that hunt, not just for sport, but for sustenance. I talk a lot about the importance of local and sustainable food systems. I think in my part of the district, hunting is a big part of a local and sustainable food system. I recognize that that gun violence is a serious concern at this moment. But I also recognize that a lot of my friends and neighbors, almost all of whom are gun owners, feel disenfranchised by the process of recent state legislation. I know that the gun owners that I know are as much, or if not more, concerned about gun violence than others. I think we need to have sensible legislation that addresses gun violence that takes a holistic approach. My wife is a psychologist. It's important to understand that mental health has come into play in a lot of these spectacular killings. So I guess, you know, I hear a lot from people who own guns who feel that they've been singled out and are made to feel responsible for some of these more violent killings. And I guess if I were lucky enough to be elected, my goal would be to give a seat at the table to mental health professionals, to give a seat at the table to gun owners, both of whom don't feel like there's been enough of their input in the gun violence discussion. Yep.
what is your position on home rule? Is this more of a federal issue or a state issue? I mean, down in Saratoga County, a real big issue right now are they want to convert the Saratoga Casino and Raceway facility into a full-fledged casino. Well, even though that's not technically in the district, a lot of the employees that work there live outside of the city in the district, and there's a lot of opposition in the whole area. But this goes beyond casino gambling. This also pertains to hydrofracking, LNG terminals. There's been a big issue down in Albany, at the Port of Albany. They are going to they're going to send crude oil through the upper Hudson Valley area from Albany. It's going to come up through Albany, up to Mechanicville, then Ballston Spa, Saratoga, up through Moreau to Fort Edward, and then over to Vermont. And it goes by almost every elementary school in the Saratoga Springs area. I mean, by our middle school, you can see the rail bed going right by the Maple Avenue Middle School up in Wilton. And, you know, I just, you know, people should have the right. I'm just curious, do you feel that communities should have the right through home rule to reject either casino facilities, crude gas pipelines, LNG terminals, nuclear power plants? I mean, what is your stance on this position? Because a big concern right now down in Saratoga County is that, you know, we may have a lot of forms of economic development imposed on us that degrade the quality of life.
Those are very big and very good questions, and they touch on philosophical questions that I think a lot of us who are in this room, just by virtue of being in this room, are people that give thought to such things. I spoke earlier about top-down mandates, and one of the examples that I think of all the time is the three strikes you're out rule, and the way that we've taken away the discretionary power from judges. There are some education reform ideas that take away discretionary power from teachers. You also raise a lot of questions about the energy future of this country and the kinds of decisions that we need to make about transporting and moving that energy and from where it comes. Unfortunately, there are not easy answers, and we have a voracious appetite for energy in this country, and we have costs, high costs associated with lots of different kinds of energy extraction and lots of different kinds of energy transportation. As the tragedy in Quebec illustrated, moving combustibles by rail has a high cost, and pipelines as well create environmental concerns. I think we have to think about how we can move toward more renewable fuels. I think we need to think about how we can move toward more locally sourced energy sources. Some people have made the idea that there could be a farmer's market of electrons. And I think what they meant by that is that different parts of the country have different kinds of energy resources that they can draw upon. Just like in agriculture, we need a diverse agriculture. We need to produce commodity grains, but we also need to produce local food. I think there's an analogy to be made in energy production. Different parts of the country have different sources. But, home rule is a really difficult issue in an area where there are so many multiple layers of jurisdiction. I think, where I live, you have to get, there's the APA, there's the DEC, there's the county, there's the town, there's the state, there's the federal. For certain kinds of investments, a group of friends tried to build a slaughterhouse in our region to produce meat locally, and all the energy savings and all the ways that small local meat processing plants can support local agriculture. The amount of regulatory impediments are just staggering. Startup costs are staggering. you know, I'd like to sit around the dinner table and talk about the philosophical issues around home rule. But I think the main thing that we need to do is to respond more vigorously to local conditions and to local concerns. We've produced a lot of one-size-fits-all policies in a lot of realms of federal legislation. And those have come at a cost at a cost of the sense of enfranchisement of local communities.
From all we hear, Congress is a pretty crazy place right now. And I wonder if you were to be there as it's now constituted, I don't know what you can do. What are your thoughts about how we get enough people like you in Congress so some of your thoughts can really happen and be implemented?
Look, I don't want to be so naive to say that I could go there as a freshman backbencher, potentially, but hopefully not from an opposition party, and change the culture of Washington. But as I said before, I have a sense that there are people, and from both major parties, who are running this year, who are running because they're fed up with that very level of dysfunction. You know, I can tell you that as a documentary filmmaker, I've worked very hard to listen to all sides of an issue. Worked very hard to incorporate all sides of an issue. A lot of my films, and some of you brought up the corn film, have been criticized roundly from both the left and from the right. A lot of my work has developed, you know, a real sense of outrage from both sides of the political spectrum. You know, in some ways that makes me feel like I've achieved something. I can't tell you that I'm going to be able to change it single-handedly, but I think I can be part of a generation of lawmakers that comes in because we're sick of the way things have been. We're sick of the double do-nothing Congress. And in the North Country, we don't have to agree with everybody about everything to get things done. I think some of the regional economic development grants that have come to the northern part of this district have come because of bipartisan coming together. It wasn't about who was wearing a blue shirt or a red shirt or a green shirt. It was about what needed to be done. When it's 20 below out, I don't think you stand around and argue about who's going to light the furnace. And I think that what's interesting is that in this part of the country, we have provided a kind of a counterexample to Washington. So I've been talking a lot about all this, you know, support, I think, in the form of educational reform and infrastructure investment that can come from careful, thoughtful, targeted federal investment. But I think the other thing that really gets me, you know, excited about the possibility of going to Washington and representing this district is to bring some of that culture of cooperation that we have around here to Washington.
Where would you specifically get the money to invest in infrastructure? Would you raise taxes, or would you cut spending in some other place? And if so, specifically, where would you cut spending?
Well, I think I would be incredibly careful about and thoughtful about the economic cost of some of the wars that we've been involved in. I think I'd like to be very careful about, you know, thinking through the consequences of those decisions.
So you cut defense spending? Because that's been drastically gutted, hasn't it?
I don't think I would cut defense spending, but I think I would be very in favor of looking at the costs of foreign wars. I think I would be very cognizant. I'd like very much to cut the subsidies to oil companies that I mentioned earlier, which are staggering and significant and come at a cost.
Get rid of marijuana enforcement, that's a lot of money there.
Yes, think of those tax dollars.
And the taxes for marijuana.
It's a state issue. Some things need to be thought of creatively. One of the thoughts is an infrastructure bank, and the idea that there could be public-private partnerships to build some infrastructure, as some of the governments in Europe have done. I think that we have lost our sense of creativity in thinking about those kinds of plans. But, you know, thoughtful spending, there's a lot of waste in Washington. And there's a lot of blood. And $20 well spent are worth more than $2,000 poorly spent. I haven't been on the appropriations committee. I haven't been in Washington, but I can tell you that there are places to make savings.
What place, because a lot of politicians, when asked that question, always say, no, we cut waste, we cut all the expenditures, unnecessary expenditures, stop spending on board and boards. But specifically, where is it coming from? A lot says we invest in infrastructure, that sounds wonderful. Well, where do we get money?
Where are we getting the money that we're spending now on things? And I think, you know,
Borrowing from China.
we are borrowing. And I think that point about oil company subsidies is a very significant one. And politicians have probably said that before, and it hasn't been done.
Under Eisenhower, what the taxes on the wealthy were on 90%, what are the taxes on the wealthy now? I mean, increase the taxes on the wealthy.
Yep.
Will the state of the Congress that exists now,
Will what?
with the state of the Congress that exists now, you're not going to be able to raise taxes on wealthy people. Is that one of the causes of deadlock that you just went through?
I think the causes of deadlock go deeper than that. Gridlock go deeper than that. The causes of gridlock have to do with the kind of obstructionist mindset in which people are jockeying for gain within the party system. I think there's a lot of media-driven politicking that have contributed to the gridlock that you described.
So are you in favor of raising taxes on the wealthy?
I'm in favor of putting everything on the table to figure out how to make the kinds of investments that we need to spur our economy. And the infrastructure bank is one of those.
I wanted to ask you about housing. Have you any thoughts on that, particularly in the North Country? There's a real problem with workers and their being able to live in the North Country. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about that, how you would address that. Should there be subsidized efforts put into place in a broader way than they are now? And what can be done about the disparity? People need to have a place to live for anything, and that probably...
People need to have a place to live. People need a way to heat their homes. Housing is one of the issues that I'd like to learn more about, but I haven't studied enough. I'm still ramping up on a lot of these issues. But, you know, some of the federal assistance programs for heating, like LIHEAP, are something that I've thought about a lot. You know, I've thought about the fact that we are exporting wood pellets through the port at Ogdensburg, that we're exporting them to Burlington for heat and power, and we have a federal assistance program that helps North Country families to buy heating oil and propane, which come from a long way away. Again, that idea that why aren't we giving wood pellet stoves instead of assistance for oil and propane? Why aren't we giving a fishing pole instead of a fish? And when we do that, just like the farm to school, we're using our local products for an energy source, and we're keeping dollars in our communities. Fort Drum has been able to do it. We should be able to do it for our low-income families. Yeah.
Well, a couple of things I want to touch upon. One of them, lately, education funding in the state of New York and in this area has gotten a little bit out of whack. I wondered what role you thought the federal government might have in making sure education funding is going to be stable and available nationwide. And I'm also someone who's very well versed in foreign policy, and I'm very big on foreign policy. And I wonder what thoughts you might have had on foreign policy issues recently.
Foreign policy.
I know.
Go to foreign policy because I've talked a little bit about education. You know, I said with respect to the situation in Russia and the Ukraine, which is very frightening on some level, because we know how the first, shift in European borders for a long time has taken place, seems to be solidifying itself. again, we mentioned the wars, some of the longest wars we fought in American history that we've just come out of. I think we have to be, what's happening in Russia is a volatile and evolving situation. You can't claim to have the kind of knowledge that lawmakers like Bill Owens probably have access to now, the kind of intelligence reports they get. But I can say that, that I would urge great caution and great attempts to try to calculate not just the primary, but the secondary and tertiary effects of that decision making. I think that the United States has an important role to play, a leadership role to play in the world community. I've been making films that take me in and out of the country a lot. I'm lucky enough to learn some languages and to live abroad. That, as Churchill is said to have said, that democracy is the worst possible system except for all the others. I think that America needs to strengthen international institutions, but can't be called upon to solely do so. We are an integrated global economy, and we need to have a role. And I think if we shrink back, as some people in the opposition and some people in this district have suggested, from international institutions, we will do so at our peril, because other nations are gaining influence now. Yeah, that's some other people. Yeah.
I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on climate change. When you were talking about that as a society we lack a vision for the future, to me and to a lot of people that I know, I think the awful, alarming, urgent statistics around climate change and how exponentially fast we're headed towards an unsustainable situation are perhaps either the main factor or one factor that keeps people from, and maybe keeps our youth from being able to envision a really sustainable future. And when you talk about infrastructure and implementing it, specifically what part of your thinking would go towards infrastructure that helped us move away from dependency on fossil fuel or whatever you think is at the base of, or the prime causes of climate change? So what would be the specifics that would support, at least remediation in that area?
I really like looking at things through economic filters. I think climate change is a pressing and present problem. I think if it is not addressed in some form, it is going to become catastrophic. I'm amazed at the degree to which good science is often discredited at the congressional level. And we will have lost a legislator, the threshold of New Jersey, who was a physicist before he became a congressman. That leaves only one physicist left in the U.S. Congress. My parents are scientists. My mother was one of 3 women graduates of 500, the class of 597 men in the class of chemical engineering. I grew up in a house that was driven by science, and when Hurricane Irene hit the North Country, I drove my tractor from Elizabethtown to Keene Valley to help dig out families over the other side of Spruce Hill. The costs of inaction are high. The infrastructure that we build, I lauded the interstate highway system because it was visionary. The infrastructure that we build now, if it's for trucks and cars, it should be the kind of infrastructure that has a 40 or a 50 or a 60 or a 70-year vision. The Adirondack North Country is suffering disproportionately from the effects of climate change. But I do think that we have to transition in a way that benefits and does not hurt our economy. And I think we have to think about an infrastructure that can both accommodate present needs and the future needs of more sustainable transportation.
So we're getting on here a little bit, maybe
Yeah.
one more. That sounds good.
What's that?
We're sort of getting on a little bit here, so maybe one more.
One more.
Someone hasn't had one before.
Yeah.
My father went to college in the GI Bill also. He went to Clarkson. He was an electrical engineer. He moved with the jobs down to New Jersey. I grew up in New Jersey. He bought a house in Queensbury on the river in 1964. So I, have a sense of camaraderie with you. One of the things is in 1990.
You're still going to vote for me.
No matter what.
In 1990, I moved up to Glens Falls, and I lived in Chestertown for 8 years. I own a house on Sherman Ave in Glens Falls, and I'm considered outside of the area, and I have a funny Jersey accent. I was wondering, you're from outside of the 21.
Correct.
What's your motivation for coming to the 21st District to run for Congress?
I'm glad you asked that question. My parents were educators, as I said. I was born in Baltimore. I've lived outside of the country. I've lived in many places inside the country. This is the only place that's been a consistent in my life. It's the only place I've always come back to. It's the place, again, when I was a kid, I wondered why all my neighbors seemed to know how to do everything. We live many miles away from many things that urban and suburban people, services that urban and suburban people are used to having at a few minutes drive. And whether it was repairing appliances or fixing vehicles or making lumber or, shooting a tin can at 100 yards, I think as a child, I was captivated by that sense of capability. I think it's because of my upbringing, always coming to this part of the world, that I celebrate working with my hands. I think I wanted to make documentaries in part so that I could make something, that I could, carry a camera around. To me, work had to do with some kind of, physicality and tactility. There have been many junctures in my life where I might have decided to sever those ties, and I never did. When the house burned down, as I said, I came here and pitched a tent. I milled the boards that went into framing the house, which I learned how to do because my neighbors taught me. I feel like the things that, in some ways, that I most value are things that I learned here. So, not to be sentimental or to repeat, but the father, who was on the GI Bill like your dad, when it was time to put his ashes somewhere, we put them here. My daughter's best friend is here. I guess I'm here because I've chosen to be here. And there are people in every community in this part of the world that will say to you, if you haven't been here for 5 generations, you're not really from here. And I understand that. And I understand that because this is a part of the world that, and I don't know as well as I should the Native American past, but always outsiders came here, said what could and could not happen here. Whether it was the British and the French in the so-called French and Indian War, the 30 Years' War, outside forces have done a lot to shape and determine the fate of people that live here. The timber interest and the mining interest, and then the conservationists from downstate. Even things that you and I would probably think were good things, as we all well know, have felt like outsiders saying what could and couldn't happen here. So I can say home is where the heart is, and I can believe it in my soul. I can say my wife and I want to dedicate ourselves to this part of the world, and I can believe it in my soul. But I think at the end of the day, I'm here because I want to be here. I'm here because this is a place that I love more than any place in the world, and it's the place that I've celebrated in both private. I've celebrated in private for decades, and now I have a chance to celebrate it publicly.
Being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you everyone for coming. We do have to be out of here by 9 o'clock to the place clean, so we should be aware of that. We will be back again at our usual home, Rockville Steakhouse Cafe, at 7 p.m. on the first Wednesday in May. So please come on in. We're going to keep going for our 12th year. Thank you for coming.
Hey, Jerry, how are you?
How are you?